Hydra Tanks. Continued from Astra Militarum and Legion of the Damned. Commissar Rikart stood amongst what remained of the Ogrin regiment he had led to what he knew to be their deaths. Yet it had not been so, for the Emperor himself had intervened. He had sent salvation where none was dreamed of, and Rikart was grateful, as he always was. The theatre had been reclaimed, for the moment. The timely advent of the mysterious spectral space marines had crushed the previously unstoppable onrush of the demonic hordes who had almost breached in Sector 12. Now Rikart found himself surprised on many counts. Surprised to be alive. Surprised that so many of his Ogrins had now gathered around him, their enemy destroyed, crushed under their bulk, under the fury of their maces and mauls. Red horns and teeth and twisted serrated weaponry was strewn everywhere as far as the eye could see. They had done well. He had led them to their death, and instead they now clustered around him in a huge silent crowd. All looked eagerly at their new battle lord, the commissar who they knew had direct contact with the Emperor, their god. Vacuously they stared for new orders, a new direction he would lead them. For they were now his. They had witnessed that he, a squishy little standard human, had led them in a charge, had fought like a thing from the deepest nightmares of hell. Despite their size advantage, despite their bovine states, they knew a battle lord when they saw one, and Rikart was that lord to them now. In so many ways they appeared like the greenskins, simple, large, made for war, always angry and on the verge of explosion into a whirlwind of violence, but childlike, unlike the orcs. Some even stooped or knelt at Rikart's feet, animalistically showing their supplication to this man who had brought them victory. Well, in their eyes anyway, for where the spectral marines may have done the lion's share of the slaughter, they had simply vanished thereafter, and all now only barely remembered that they had been there at all. So it was that all adulation, all of the glory of the victory and its utterly shocking existence, was heaped upon the Commissar. Rikart looked around him, turning on the spot slowly, so he could see all, and all could see he was about to address them. But as he was about to speak, all then heard the distant rumble of something approaching from above. The congregation looked up and saw, to their horror, the black cloud of aircraft coming in their direction. Rikart could make out some of the things in the air from a far greater distance than his Ogrin charges, as he used his bionic eye to glimpse the distant cloud. His heart sank as he made out the waves of flying things that filled the skies. Some were aircraft, of ancient design, but that made them no less effective. In fact, most of the time older patterns meant more power, more armor, more technologically advanced, more weaponry, and more carnage. But many of the things were demons, warped tragedies of beings either changed and twisted or never born themselves. Huge birds that could have been small indigenous fowl at a point only days or even hours before, were now filling the skies and coming towards Sector 12 in his force. There would be nothing that Ogrin could do. He knew this. The enemy would dive down on them and terrify the childlike Ogrin, the flapping disconcerting them, the diving attacks not spotted or defended against in time. Their eyes would be pecked out, their throats gouged into ribbons by a million beaks and talons. They would break and run, and the few bombers and other aircraft in this cloud would kill them with impunity. And there was not a damn thing Rikart could do about it. It was then that his Vox Ogrin lumbered over and pointed at its back. The Ogrin turned around and Rikart took the comms equipment off its back and responded. He barked one word down the comms. "Rikart!" The voice he heard was that of Colonel Barker. "I have to say, I am surprised. If I am honest, I did not think your stroll in Sector 12 would go so well." "There was an event. I shall report back when able, if able. I have to inform you that Sector 12 is about to be hit by all of the flying hell one can imagine. Then imagine more." He knew his charges were all watching him, listening. He could not be brutally honest with Barker at this point. I hope you know what I am saying, Colonel." "Ah, yes. We had noticed that. As we did not have the demons crashing through our lines, we assumed that somehow you had held them. As such, I have dispatched some friends who shall be with you in moments. Hold the line, Commissar. If you can do that, we may well have a chance here. Reinforcements are on the way." "Understood," Rikart snapped, then cut off the comms. As the Ogryn daintily placed it back on his shoulders, there came another sound to match that of the oncoming aerial swarms. A thundering of tracks and mud, as a tank column was about to crest the hills of the valley and progress down to the basin at whose bottom Rikart and his charges stood. When the first few came over and into full sight, there was a unanimous and profoundly deafening roar, enthusiastically dragged from every throat there. For some reason, caught up in the moment as he was, surrounded by childlike euphoria, Rikart himself raised his power sword in the air and bellowed along with his charges. The Ogryn stumped each other on the back and laughed, and then turned and started making rude signals at the oncoming thunderclouds. Some dropped their weapons and opened their stances and gave obvious "come on then" signals to the skies. For they had come, an entire column of them. Hydras. Rikart took command and blew on a whistle. At this, his chargers all looked at him once more, but beaming now in undiluted joy. He ordered them into lines and they surrounded the vehicles, as a score of Hydras now sat in the bowl, and as one. They had quad guns, 2 on either side of the turret, whirred up as they elevated to take aim at the skies. When the dark clouds of demons and traitors finally came into view, they were already in range as they crested the valley lip, and the Hydra commanders wasted no time at all. Each Hydra fired up its twin-linked Hydra autocannons and let loose. The air was filled with a barrage so profuse, so intense, so vicious, that it seemed that there was not a metre of the sky that was not covered by their fury. Flying things exploded under impact of the shells, blood raining down in waterfall-like amounts as the adversaries were torn to ribbons. The vehicles, older fighters and bombers, mostly broke off and zoomed in either direction, left or right or up, trying to avoid the hail of death. But the tracking systems of the Hydras left nothing past. Rikart looked up and witnessed his salvation. His Ogryns were stood in lines, as they had been trained, but all looked up at the carnage like a child watching fireworks. He could feel the electric buzz coming off them with each passing moment, and soon it was over. The skies emptied, either by fire from the Hydras, or from the traitors beating a hasty retreat from the fusillade, back to their caves and caverns. The attack again had been broken. Rikart motioned to his comms Ogryn and picked the handle from its back. "Rikart, attack broken and retreating. Thank you for the spectacle, Colonel. Now, if you have no burning objections, I feel my boys have a bit too much energy to be bringing them back to camp just yet. About time we took back the initiative. We'll be heading into Sector 13 now. Backfill us and support our push, and send over the 312th Rough Riders if you aren't using them. We need the speed to hunt these scum down when we break their lines." To be continued. Welcome, gentle listener. I'm Voldemort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and war gear of the Warhammer 40k universe. The grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And today, we are to discuss one of the specialist armoured vehicles of the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard. As we have heard, these vehicles are specifically designed as support platforms to fire into the skies to keep the Xenos, traitor, or heretics from gaining or retaining air superiority. Which is all important to the Imperial Guard, as their columns and formations are as numerous as the movements of an ant colony. For aircraft, be they strafing air-to-ground fighter attacks, or brutal suppression bombardment from bombers, are the bane of a massed guard column. Hence the existence and development of the Hydra, and its especially loved status amongst the common soldiery. And so, as usual, for the very basics, Let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, Hydras. Whether faced by lightning-fast Xenos fighters or demonic leather-winged monstrosities, the Hydra flak tank is ideally equipped to blow aerial foes out of the sky. The Hydra's predictive logic spirit singles out and locks onto its targets with the tenacity of a predatory beast. Autoloaders engage with a rising whine as the Hydra's turret traverses, its quad autocannon howling as it fills the air with soaring lines of firepower. Few airborne enemies, no matter how debased or unnatural, can survive for long once they are locked in the Hydra's sights. Though the Hydra has sufficient armor to weather a fair degree of punishment, it is intended primarily as a support vehicle rather than a mainline battle tank. Nonetheless, the Hydra is far from defenseless. Its hull can be fitted with various armaments, and its autocannon can be angled downward to slaughter grounded enemies when necessary. However, the Hydra's machine spirit hungers only for airborne prey, its tracking servos refusing to trace the lumbering paths made by foes that cannot fly, meaning it must be aimed manually, and therefore less accurately when targeting opponents on the ground. Company commanders must therefore ensure they have seconded enough infantry or tanks to guard their Hydra batteries from direct attack. With a sufficient escort, the Hydras can remain safe from harm while concentrating their efforts on keeping the skies clear. Even a single Hydra can throw up a storm of flak, swatting enemy aircraft from the skies with an adamantine fist. When several of these vehicles draw up and open fire, the devastation wrought on airborne enemies is spectacular. Monstrous Xenos wings are reduced to streamers of flesh. The gibbous flight sacks of demonic drones burst under the weight of puncturing fire, and even heavily armored attack craft are reduced to perforated scrap as their fuel tanks and internal magazines explode. For most Imperial guardsmen, be they artillery crew, tankers, or foot-slogging infantry, the screaming approach of enemy aircraft is a sound that evokes absolute dread. When the black shadow of monstrous wings falls across them, the men of the guard have little defense besides prayer. So it is that the Hydra has acquired a reputation as an omen of good luck, with nicknames ranging from Steel Saviors to the more colloquial Bug Zapper. Hydras are viewed with comradely affection by most soldiers in the Astra Militarum. A common tradition amongst the men of many regiments is to rap their knuckles against the hull of a Hydra before battle. The so-called Angel's Knock is performed in solemn silence and intended to draw the vigilance of the Hydra's machine spirit in the battle to come. Hydra crews share in their vehicle's popularity, enjoying something approaching folk hero status amongst their comrades and a place around any squad's campfire. Some Hydra crewmen revel in the regard of their comrades and the adrenaline rush of their duty, while others find the weight of responsibility uncomfortable. But few are foolish enough to believe the camaraderie of their fellows is untainted by self-interest. Regardless of their crew's attitudes or affectations, when Hydras roll into battle, they make all the difference to an Astra Militarum army. On Sorrentos III, during the Battle of the Sandsea, the Cadian 1652nd Armoured were tasked with breaking the Necron line. Roaring across the dunes, the Lehman Russ squadrons of the 1652nd directed a withering rain of fire into their deathless foes. Great geysers of crimson sand were blown high in the air as the Necron line disintegrated before the tankers' armoured charge. Then came the dune sides. Screaming over the battlefield on howling repulsor jets, several wings of the ominous alien craft began to strafe the Imperial tanks with the glowing beams of their death rays. Flames billowed and black smoke gouted forth as first one Lehman Russ, then another exploded. Though well prepared and outfitted for ground warfare, the Cadians were fighting without the military support of the aerial formations of the Aeronautica Imperialis, meaning they had no aircraft of their own to intercept this threat in the sky. For a perilous moment, it appeared as though the 1652nd would be hurled back in disarray, but their commander had issued his own call for reinforcements. Barreling over the crest of a nearby dune came 3 Hydras, tracks churning spumes of sand in their wake. The flak tanks marked their speeding targets and opened fire, filling the sky with fury. One after another, the Necron attack craft were riddled with holes. Driven by eldritch technology, the living metal of the ancient Xenos flyers began to writhe, moving to fill in the gaping rents. Yet no matter how fast the puncture wounds were resealed, the Hydra's quad autocannons continued to savage their targets. Flurries of sparks and crackling green lightning wreathed the hulls of the Doomsides as they plummeted to the dunes below, tumbling end over end and exploding with enormous force. As the last of the enemy aircraft turned tail and fled, the surviving tanks of the 1652nd pushed forward again, their route to victory now covered by the watchful guns of the Hydras. The Hydra is armed with a turret-mounted set of twin-linked Hydra autocannons, long-barreled autocannons that unleash explosive flak rounds at an extremely high rate of fire. The Hydra's gunner and loader are positioned in the vehicle's turret and work together to keep the weapon's automated loading mechanism and complex targeting systems operational. The vehicle is also armed with a single hull-mounted heavy bolter, which can be used against enemy infantry that get too close, or can be swapped out for a heavy flamer for the same purpose. The tank can also be equipped with camouflage netting, extra armor plating, a hunter-killer missile launcher, a minesweeper, improved communications equipment, a pintle-mounted heavy starbber, or storm bolter, rough terrain modifiers, a searchlight, track guards, and smoke launchers. Quite a bit of kit. Its Vulcanor 16 twin-coupled multi-burn engine powers the tank, which weighs in at 38 tons, length 5.29 meters, width 3.78 meters, height 5.1 meters, with a ground clearance of 0.45 meters, and a maximum speed on road of 50 km per hour and 35 km per hour off-road. The Hydra has 19 known patterns and 5 crew, 1 commander, 1 driver, gunner, loader, and comms operator, and is manufactured on most Forge worlds, so popular is the design. Her main armament is the twin-linked Hydra autocannons that have a 0 to 79 degree elevation and are mounted on the turret that can traverse the entire 360 degrees. End quote. Now the Hydra tank is really only quite a new vehicle in the Astra Militarum range, as things are judged in the history of Warhammer as a tabletop game. This is simply because there was previously no real need for it. But when flyers of all forms and factions began to permeate the game, then the call for ground-based anti-aircraft ability was demanded. Hence the development and production of this magnificent toy. The inclusion of one element, the flyer, brought out a smattering of anti-aircraft vehicles across the ranges to counter them, and thus do we see that even a slight tweak, a single model sometimes, can skew the entire game to the faction of the forces and armies that can field them. The eternal arms race that many bemoan, but I actually laud in many ways. For it means the tactics of the game and the units you will choose, if looking for optimal builds, or even just a fighting chance sometimes, will shift and change. Many may presently riz or deride the constant changes in the meta, which are forced by alterations to the rules by way of frequently asked questions, which are released multiple times a year, and often after a new codex or set of rule changes have gone live. Now I see their point graphically. Why should I have to upgrade my knowledge, constantly tinker with my lists, perpetually have more facts to read that can negate the effectiveness of my favourite models? Why? Well, my counter to this is twofold. One is about keeping the game and the meta fresh. One can bemoan having to change a killer list, but from the other perspective, this means that a unit that may not have been optimal, despite being a favourite, could languish on a shelf for an entire edition, gathering dust, not glory, taking up space instead of holding centre stage. And that to me is unfortunate. Many will decry the game design and the development department, stating that all figures should be made equally and that they should always have value. Alas, no matter how clever a designer you are, no matter how encyclopedic your knowledge of the rules, you will miss something. You will never be able to outthink hundreds of thousands of players and competitive munchkins who are adamant that they wish to try to break the rules, to find those hidden treasures of combination and situation that may arise and simply not be caught by the game designers, no matter how hard they work. because it is not a balanced game and never can be. Chess, that's balanced. No dice, you see. So my counter to this point is that for every unit that goes under, another rises up, which means that your favourite model's unit or HQ may start an edition being a bit, well, whiffy. But you can hold out hope. The unit may remain being subpar all throughout the edition, but there is a chance with every FAQ, with every codex or campaign expansion, that your favourite toy will be able to shine again. And that cannot be a bad thing. It also means that if someone does find that holy grail, the army that cannot be beaten, well, most of the time, then it is only undefeatable for a period. Imagine how things were before, when there was a race over a very long period. Not months, but years. Some armies did not get a refresh in over a decade. Now imagine that. You're riding high or drifting around the bottom of the competitive leagues and cannot see the end of the tunnel for years. Now we all know that I am a fluff monkey and a narrative player. But even I like to see how the competitive games throw down sometimes. I can think of nothing more tedious than seeing 100 armies of this super build facing off for years on end, with the only path to victory being he who rolls more sixes. Again, just my opinion. But one I wanted people to consider before lambasting Games Workshop with every change. It's the simple fact that some of the competitive players, or those who create net lists as they are called, can be exceptionally intelligent and often are mathematical savants. Let us never forget that GW creates its games for them to be enjoyed, and the fun element is far more important to GW headquarters than the competitive. And that is as it should be in my mind. For as fun and interesting as the competitions and the tournaments may be, let's be absolutely honest, they represent a tiny fraction of the player base and a minuscule amount of the games that are played compared to the fun ones enjoyed in every club or table or kitchen counter across every country of the globe. So maybe, just maybe, we should be giving them a break and enjoying the game for what it is. A game. I have been Baltimore, your faithful servant. I hope you have enjoyed this brief introduction to the Hydra anti-aircraft vehicle. If so, then please do consider liking and subscribing. If you do, then hit the notifications button, as I would not want you to miss out. If you see the worth in what we are doing, then do also consider joining us on Patreon, or giving the video a share if that is beyond your present scope. It will be a great boon. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.